crime grips Baltimore City, its citizens are looking for a leader to turn the tide of violence.
At this particular time, we're at a point where rhetoric is not going to solve this problem.
Now, 4 people are vying to be the city's next top prosecutor. The race making lots of twists and turns as the incumbent is facing a federal indictment.
I'm ready to go to trial tomorrow. Put this on trial right now so I can prove my innocence.
Tonight, Fox 45 News holds candidates' feet to the fire, demanding action to save our city. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight for a Fox 45 News, Your Voice, Your Future town hall. Tonight we're focusing on the city state's attorney's race and the growing crime crisis. The candidates tonight will be answering your questions. We invited the incumbent city state's attorney Marilyn Mosby as well as Democratic candidate Ivan Bates. The both of them have refused to participate. However, we have chairs here ready and willing for them to participate and answer questions if they so choose to show up. However, we do have 2 candidates here tonight who have agreed to answer your questions. Let's get right to those participants. We have Democratic candidate Thiru Vignarajah. He earned his law degree from Harvard Law, spent time as a federal prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office, chief of major investigations within the city state's attorney's office. Later, he went on to become the Deputy Attorney General for the state of Maryland. He's now the CEO of a community development financial institution, Capital Plus. Thiru, thank you for joining us tonight. We also have independent candidate Roya Hanna. Hanna earned her law degree at the University of Maryland. She began her career at the National Center for Community Prosecution and Gun Violence Prevention, working with local prosecutors to reduce gun violence in their communities. She went on to become a prosecutor in the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office, and she is now working as a defense attorney. Candidates, thank you again for participating. We have a lot of questions, and let's dive right into some of them. As we mentioned at the top, we do not have the participation of another Democrat, Ivan Bates, or the incumbent Marilyn Mosby. We also know that Ivan Bates has challenged you, Mosby, to a debate, did not mention you Thiru or Roya Hanna in the participation of those debates. They didn't participate last time. They're not here again tonight. My question, Thiru, is why do you think that he's not challenging you to a debate, and why don't you think that they're here to participate in this conversation tonight?
Look, I'm genuinely confused by their thinking. This is a conversation with the public. It's an opportunity to hear the frustrations of people. It's an opportunity to hear the aspirations of people. If you want to lead this city, you should show up. And to one day say, I'm going to show up for debates, to invite people to debates, and then not to attend for your reasons to shift. I'm disappointed, I think, in our opponents because I don't think they're taking seriously the contest for this race. If you want to lead in this city, you got to show up. It's the first thing you got to do.
Roya Hanna, do you think that you should be involved in some of the conversations when it comes to the debates? I know right now we're talking about the Democratic primary when it comes to the other 3 candidates, but you're looking to be the next city state's attorney as well. Do you think voters should hear from you and hear how your ideas stack up among the others?
Absolutely. I mean, the fact of the matter is there are 4 people in this race at the moment. After July, there will only be 2. But I think it is important to engage in voters at every single stage. The fact of the matter is this is a job interview. And part of a job interview is showing up. And our other 2 opponents have decided they don't want the job very much because they can't be bothered to show up.
Do you think that both of them or either of them are, I guess, less willing to participate in more forums because it is an opportunity for other voters to hear what they have to say? Perhaps maybe they don't like what they have to say. Do you think that's a reason?
Let's take Marilyn Mosby. She would have to answer for why there have been 8 years of 300-plus murders. She would have to explain why she has spent so much time out of the office, even as she's paid to be the state's attorney for the most violent city in America. She would have to answer how she expects people in Baltimore to vote for her, knowing that there is pending federal charges. Now, those are not unfair questions. I'm not trying to be mean-spirited. I have a lot of respect for Ms. Mosby. She faces a very stressful situation. Her family and her defense team deserve her undivided attention. So does the city and her office. There's a lot of questions that the public wants to ask her, and she alone has the answers. If she's not here, we can't answer them.
We obviously have some frustrated members of the community who are here tonight. We can hear them. But do you think that that's indicative of the sense of frustration that's building in the community when it comes to the violence? We see shooting after shooting, homicide after homicide. Do you think that the city is at a tipping point when it comes to the frustration? We can hear it right here in front of City Hall tonight. Roya?
I think people are very frustrated. I think people want to be heard. I think the fact that people do not communicate with their constituents, do not tell them what they can expect, do not tell them a time frame in which they can expect decisions, leads to people to be frustrated. And, you know, our other two opponents won't even bother to show up to answer the questions and to face the constituents. This job is about facing the constituents and telling the public what you can do and cannot do. For the most part, all prosecutors agree on the basics. It is the nuances of our policies and procedures that really matter. And it's what we need to debate. And, you know, I was talking about it with somebody earlier. From the clash of differing opinions comes the spark of truth. We need that spark of truth, and debates provide the forum to do that.
Through.
If I could just add, the frustration you're hearing today, we hear all across the city. In the past 28 days, there's been 27 murders. There's been 39 armed carjackings and 51 shootings. Nobody wants that in their neighborhood. Nobody wants it anywhere in the city. This level of frustration, this level of heartbreak has been going on not just this past month, but for every month for the past 8 years. And I'm going to say to the folks directly at home, you care, you show up, you're taking time out of your evening to watch this conversation because you know that public safety is the biggest issue in the city. Go to justiceforbaltimore.com. It's our website where you can see and hear our ideas and solutions. You can get involved. If you care as much as we care, then show up. There are disagreements that Ms. Hannah and I would no doubt have, but the one thing we agree on is the only person entitled to this job is the person that shows up.
Well, let me ask you about the relationship between the city state's attorney's office and the police department, because obviously frustrations with police and law enforcement and trust, that has been discussed, and we've talked about this before, about how there's been a broken level of trust between the community and the police, the state's attorney's office working with the police or not. How do you plan to work on rebuilding that relationship, and do you think that's a relationship worth building?
Absolutely. I think there's 3 relationships that have been broken these past years. The first one is the state's attorneys to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the work between state prosecutors and my former office when I was a federal prosecutor, the relationship between the state's attorney's office and the police department. There's no level of mutual respect between the prosecutors and the police, and the relationship between the state's attorney's office and the community. All of those things need to be rebuilt. I was particularly proud to have earned the support and endorsement of 5 former police commissioners here in Baltimore City. And one of the things they all emphasized in their endorsement of me is the respect that the rank and file had for the work that we did. We didn't always agree. We didn't always see eye to eye, but we always knew that we were working towards a common purpose. They pushed us to be our best. We pushed them to be their best. That's what a partnership is, and that's what the state's attorney's office needs to do again.
Let me ask you about that, because we did see the endorsements of some of the former police commissioners, but the relationship between the community and the police isn't the best in some areas in the city. Do you think that that could be a liability come time for election?
Could you say that last part again?
Is it a liability to have the police backing you so heavily when we know that the relationship between the community and the police is rocky?
Yeah, look, the relationship is incredibly rocky, and I think one of the things that they need to see is the state's attorney who's willing to be out among the people. Whether people are shouting and screaming at them out of frustration, whether people are answering hard questions that you're putting to us, we have to be there. We have to be willing to have this conversation. That's one of the things that we have always done, is to sit down and talk with people, to have a thoughtful, constructive dialogue back and forth between it.
Roy Hannah, do you think that the relationship can be rebuilt between the state's attorney's office and the police department?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that that relationship is so pivotal, and we have to recognize that it has caused a lot of terrible outcomes. Police are charging cases that shouldn't be charged, and cases are not being won that should be won. And if there was better communication, those things could be remedied, and I do think that relationship can be repaired, and I think the relationship between the police and the community can be repaired as well. You know, my first job out of law school was to go around and train prosecutors on how to establish effective community prosecution programs. And a lot of that was helping to build the relationship between the police and the prosecutor and the community. That relationship is sacrosanct and needs to be improved, and that can only be done through being there and showing up and having the hard conversations.
Do you think that the role of the state's attorney, or there's a place for the next state's attorney to have in that conversation when it comes to rebuilding the relationships between the community members and the police, right?
Yes, I mean, I think that it is, the state's attorney can be a intermediary, because we're not the police. We're not out there every day. We're not actually putting handcuffs on people. And so I think there is a different level of respect for the state's attorney's office versus the police department. And I do think that it is pivotal to have the state's attorney work on that.
Two very specific examples of what the state's attorney can do to rebuild the relationship between the community and the police. The first thing we're going to do is to match community policing with community prosecutors. Prosecutors are going to be assigned by police district. You're going to get a chance to know the prosecutors that work on cases in your district, whether it's at the district court level or the circuit court level, whether it's carjackings or murders. That's one way of helping establish some real relationships between the prosecutors and the community. One of the frustrations that people have is that there are no relationships right now. And we can't solve this problem right now, but we can when we're in office. The second thing we can do is something that Montgomery County does. Montgomery County has a situation where every homicide prosecutor goes out to the homicide scene when the homicide happens. They are there shoulder to shoulder with the homicide detective working the case. That, too, is an opportunity to build a relationship, to show people that these prosecutors care as much as the community does.
How do you have those relationships? And it sounds like that would be staff intensive, when we know that there's been a staffing problem within the state's attorney's office currently. Do you think that that would be a priority, given the fact that we know that there are few assistant state's attorneys available? Through?
This has got to be a top priority. You've got to rebuild that office from the ground up.
How do you do that?
And I'll give an example of how Robert Morgenthau did it. Robert Morgenthau was the legendary DA in New York City. And over the course of a 40-year career, he built what many regard as the greatest prosecutor's office in American history. He would go into small law firms, big law firms, local law schools, the best law schools in the country, and he would say, look, folks, I want you to come work in the Manhattan DA's office. We're going to pay you a dime on the dollar. You're going to work incredibly hard and every weekend, but you'll learn more about trying cases in the next 4 years. You'll do more good in the next 4 years than you will for the rest of your career. People came in droves. It was the most coveted job out of law school in the country. And here's the thing, New York City isn't Gotham anymore. Baltimore is. And we can use our challenges as a lightning rod to build the talent, to bring in the talent, and build the greatest prosecutor's office in American history.
Roy, you worked in the city state's attorney's office. You know what it's like in there. What challenges is the current office facing that you could overcome when it comes to recruiting and building back up the level of prosecutors necessary to bring these cases forward?
Well, the most current immediate issue is that they have a huge staffing shortage. You know, I talked to a prosecutor the other day that said they have less than 100 staff to actually go and try these cases. Under Greg Bernstein, it was 217. So the fact that they're down to about half is a huge problem. It means that the prosecutors are there have overwhelming caseloads. And I do think that with different leadership, people will come back to that office. I get calls regularly from people who have left the office that would love to come back. They just couldn't do it under leadership that clearly didn't care about their prosecutors and didn't care about the work. Prosecutors actually like what they do. They like doing justice. And, you know, when you have an office that is not interested in doing that, it is a real problem, and that is why people leave.
Well, we know that the city has a growing crime problem. We saw a quadruple shooting hours before this town hall started. Is there a role in the state's attorney's office to work with the police department to not only prosecute these cases, but to formulate policies from your perspective that could really help get a handle on this violence? Through?
Absolutely. I mean, the state's attorney is the chief law enforcement officer in the most dangerous city in America. If there are new laws that are required, the prosecutor's got to be advocating for them alongside the police. The reality, however, is that we actually have lots of laws on the books that are available to us right now. There are gang laws that can be used to go after the gangs in Baltimore. There are laws that prohibit drug organizations from using juveniles to sell crimes or selling drugs near schools. Those are laws that we can use. There are an awful lot of of weapons in the arsenal if police and prosecutors could get on the same page. The problem right now is cops are not making enough arrests. The arrests that are being made are being dropped by the prosecutor, and the prosecutor is turning around and doing plea deals like the one they did in Luther Trent, where a person gets a slap on the wrist and is back on the street, acknowledging that they deserved a harder sentence. When that's what happens in the overwhelming majority of cases, the criminals get the message. You can commit crime in Baltimore. Crime pays in Baltimore. You can commit a murder in Baltimore and get away with it, and they're right about those things, and that's got to change.
Let me ask you, Roya, about the prosecution policies in place right now, because obviously that's been a big conversation. Marilyn Mosby's prosecution policies, not prosecuting crime she is deemed low level. I asked the mayor about this last week, actually, and he told me that somebody getting cited for an open container violation, that person isn't the same person going out and shooting somebody. Those two things are not related. Is that really what we're talking about, though? Do you think that there's a correlation between lower level crimes and escalating into more violent ones?
I think you have to look at a couple of different things. That Hopkins study looked at a very specific group of people who had warrants out for several years, and, obviously were not frequent flyers. They were not the people who would regularly be committing crimes anyway. So it is not surprising to me that those people did not reoffend in the year that they looked at them. But I do think that there are a lot of lower level crimes that do lead to higher crimes. And, sometimes when you arrest somebody for a simple possession case, you then find a gun. And by finding a gun, you prevent a murder. And it is generally this sense of lawlessness that comes about when you just say, I'm not doing anything. And, there have been so many studies that have shown that the environment contributes to crime. There's that study out of Philadelphia that I cite all the time that says repairing vacant lots and fixing vacant lots leads to a $26 reduction in gun crime costs for every dollar spent on that. When you look at the disarray of our communities, it is clear that they need something, and if we're not addressing the lower level crimes, it also means that we're not addressing the higher level crimes. And in this state's attorney's office, it's probably because they don't have the staff and they don't focus on anything that is actually important to the citizens of Baltimore.
I do want to come back to the vacant home property issue a little bit later, because we're seeing that become a more prevalent issue as well. But in your opinion, do you think lower level crimes not being prosecuted is leading to an escalation of higher crime or more violent crimes being committed?
Look, this isn't rocket science. We know in Baltimore, we know across the country that a culture of lawlessness rarely stays confined to petty offenses. On day one, we're going to have to rescind the policy of categorically saying that certain crimes aren't crimes anymore. Of course, prosecutors have to use their common sense judgment about which cases to pursue. I don't have time or resources in an office that is handling the worst murder crisis in American history to prosecute loitering and trespass cases. But of course we have to be smart about sending that message to the public that certain crimes aren't criminal. It's confusing to the cops, it sends a terrible message to the community, and it emboldens criminals to believe
that some of the crime in Baltimore City, some people think that is escalating and bleeding over into Baltimore County. The Baltimore County State's Attorney, Scott Schellenberger, says that he thinks the criminal justice system is about, quote, punishment and protection of the public. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, look, this is the principal charge. I agree with a lot of what the Baltimore County State's Attorney said, but there are some parts that I disagree with as well. I mean, here's the reality. Criminologists know that the severity of the sentence is not the key, it's the certainty of it. So it's not vital that every carjacker get 30 years or 50 years. What's vital is that carjackers know they're going to get caught, they're going to be prosecuted, and they're going to have to pay some consequences for their crime. If that message is not out there, then you're going to see a rise in carjackings, which we have seen 70% this year over last year. You're going to see a rise in shootings and homicides, which we've seen. This is what happens if you don't make it clear that there are certain and swift consequences for your conduct. That's got to be the focus.
Okay, Through, thank you. I want to go to the audience member so we can have someone ask a question in the audience. If you want to step up to the mic, please say your name and direct the question specifically to one of the candidates up on stage.
That's the name, I got My name is Danielle Brown. I'm the parent of Danielle Rochester, the son that was murdered February 19th, 2022. So my question will be, what do you plan to do about police brutality and police not following laws?
Thank you. Tharu, why don't you take a crack at that first?
Look, first of all, I want to tell you that I am so sorry for your loss. It is a profound tragedy, what happened. And as you know, as many people know, I can't comment on the specifics of the case, but I will say two things, if it's okay. First, if anybody watches that video, you will be sick to your stomach to see what happened. It is disgusting. It is heartbreaking to watch what happened.
Go ahead.
Police officers that discourage police officers from shooting at moving vehicles. The reason for that is because it doesn't stop the vehicle from going in the direction. What it does is endanger the driver, it endangers the police officers. So there does appear to be on its face a breach of local policy. Now here's the challenge for me. If I say more than that, if I have the privilege of serving as state's attorney, I will have to recuse myself from that matter because as a prosecutor, I'm bound by prosecutorial rules of ethics and I can't publicly comment on pending investigations. And if I do, then I have to recuse myself. I'm sorry that I can't say more, but I am heartbroken for your loss. I'm heartbroken for what people see in that video. And then I will also say to you more broadly that police need to be held accountable for their conduct. One of the things that I have focused on is the fact that there does need to be independent review of decisions not to prosecute in cases where a state's attorney's office doesn't proceed. There does need to be a focus not just on the high-level misconduct, but on low-level misconduct. Long before police learn how to plant evidence or forge a search warrant, as they did in the GTTF case, they learned how to commit overtime fraud. Those officers were making $20, $30, $40, $50, $80,000 a year in overtime, and nobody was even looking into it. Those are the kinds of things, very concretely, that we can do. Darnell Rochester's life mattered. I am very sorry for your loss. And
let him answer.
Once again, Darnell Rochester's life mattered. It is a tragedy what happened. And all I can tell you is that for anyone who watches that video, you should be sickened, you should be heartbroken by what unfolded. Because I want to be the state's attorney responsible for investigating a case like that, I can't say more than I can. And if I did, I would be required to recuse myself from that matter. I hope you understand, ma'am. Thank you.
Roya, do you want to answer that question as well?
Can you answer as well?
Of course. Miss Rochester, I'm so very sorry
1 second.
about that.
Let's let this go by. Okay.
I am so very sorry for the loss of your son and that you had to go through a Mother's Day facing this terrible tragedy. You know, we have to do everything that we can to stop police brutality and to prosecute cops who have police brutality. You know, I'm the only person running who has actually personally tried and convicted a retired police officer for shooting an unarmed kid. I am the only person who has personally prosecuted a police officer for a double homicide. You know, and that is the kind of experience that I'm going to bring to this office. As Mr. Vigneraj has said, if we say anything and make any sort of pronouncements about how we would handle this particular case, we wouldn't be allowed to handle it in the future. So I know everyone would like us to give answers, but unfortunately the ethical rules that apply to prosecutors kind of prohibited that. But as to police brutality, absolutely, we will address it. I intend to have a government accountability.
So who do you know that you can help us out with?
So you, moving forward, if elected, you would do all you can for as police brutality?
Absolutely. I intend to have a government accountability unit to not just go after police, but to go after everyone in Baltimore city government and wherever they may be who are violating the public trust. You know, rebuilding the public trust doesn't just take place at 601 Fayette. It requires rebuilding faith in our schools, rebuilding faith in our municipal body, all of that sort of thing. We have to solve this issue of police brutality because that divides community trust. That is one of the things that prevents prosecutors from being able to get convictions because people don't trust the police, right? We have to stop that. And I understand why people don't trust the police. You know, right now I'm a defense attorney and I see it from a different angle than I did as a prosecutor. I see my clients come in all the time that tell me a story, and now that we have body camera, a lot of times what they're saying tends to be true. And I think body cams have, in a lot of ways, helped to stem some of the issues, but obviously not in this case. And Mr. Vigner is right. The camera in this case is awful, and I'm so very sorry for your tragic loss.
If I can just add one thing, because I think your question is so important. I want to elaborate on something that Roya said. Folks at home are watching an HBO series about the prosecution of the GTTF officers. These are 8 officers who committed one of the worst policing scandals in American history. What they will notice is that it wasn't handled by local prosecutors. It was handled by federal prosecutors. But that doesn't have to be the case. We have pledged to create a public corruption unit that will look at corruption in every agency, including the police department. There's no reason why Marilyn Mosby can't bring those cases. There's no reason why those cases couldn't have been investigated and prosecuted by the local state's attorney's office. Instead, it was handled by the feds. And as tempting as it is, I see the frustration. Our opponents have made it very easy, very tempting to say, I'm going to deliver you justice. Everybody would cheer if we did that, but they are making a promise they can't keep, that they cannot ethically keep. Because if I promise something on a campaign trail about delivering justice in a particular case, I assure you that a judge would force me out of the case once I got into office because I have violated my prosecutorial ethic to not publicly comment on a pending investigation. I hope you understand.
I understand exactly what you're saying. You're basically saying if you are elected, and since this is an open investigation, you can't really say too much about it.
We can't comment publicly on any case until we bring charges. And if we decline to bring charges, we can comment on that decision. And after a conviction, we can talk about a lot of it. You'll notice the federal prosecutors are not permitted to talk about the prosecution of Marilyn Mosby. I'm sure they would love to stand up here and tell you all the things that they've been done. They've been accused of being racist. They've been accused of being politically motivated. And yet they haven't been able to respond because that's not permitted.
Thank you for your question, and I'm very sorry for your loss as well. Thank you. Now, candidates, you mentioned something, and this I feel like goes back to the level of trust, building that trust with the police department, with the communities, and the state's attorney's office. We often hear when we're talking to people in the community there, they don't want to talk to the police. It's the snitching mentality that has grown to be a part of the culture in some parts of the city. How do you break that to help build cases and get convictions for some of the crimes that are happening in the city? Through?
Look, it's a big mistake to believe that the situation in 2022 is any different than the situation in 2011 or 2012 when we had murders below 200. Nobody was knocking on my door saying, Mr. Vignarajah, I want to be a witness in your case. It was hard to get witnesses to come forward then as well. But we worked with witnesses, we worked with victims to make sure they understood that if they took that ultimate risk to come forward, to share what they knew, to say what they saw in a courtroom, that we would honor it by taking their cases seriously, by not frivolously dropping those cases, by not cutting these bargain basement deals so that Luther Trent is back on the streets. Luther Trent is an example of a person who went in the middle of the night and burned a house down with his ex-girlfriend and 2 other roommates inside. They all came forward. They were all willing to testify. You know how they were treated? You know how they were rewarded? They were told the day before a plea deal was struck that the person who tried to burn their house down and kill them would be out on the streets the next day over their objection. You don't encourage victims or witnesses to come forward if that's how you treat the victims and witnesses who do come forward. That's got to change.
Roya?
I think it all can be summed up in one word: honesty. And you have to be honest with the victims and the witnesses in the city. You have to tell them what you can do and how you're going to help them and follow through on that. And, you know, you can't force people into testifying. Nobody's saying that. But if you are actually sit down and talk to people and say, this is what I can do, this is what we're going to do, and actually follow through and actually win that case. You know, when I was a prosecutor in a shooting unit, I had a case where the victim was recanting, or a witness was recanting, and he had actually got shot again because he had cooperated with the police. And so obviously he recanted when we went to trial. And I called him afterwards and I told him that we won and that we followed through and we did exactly what we said we were going to do. And he was so overjoyed. It is not that people don't want justice and they don't want people to get convicted after shooting them. It's just that they're terrified. And you have to do something to address that fear. You know, I got more time for witness intimidation than anybody in Baltimore's history. You have to take this seriously. You have to put all your money where your mouth is and really get the job done.
Let me ask you about witness protection when it comes to these cases, because do you think that there is a role for, or room for, statewide partners, federal partners to help with the witness protection? Is the state's attorney's office equipped with the current resources to handle that, or do you need more support?
I think they need more support. Right now, they generally put them in a hotel room for a couple of days, and, you know, a lot of times people are coming from big 3-bedroom houses and they don't want to be holed up in one little room, and the state's attorney's office can maybe afford them moving expenses, but they can't move them out of the city. And we have to do something more to address that and work with the state partners and work with the federal partners to see if we can really protect people if we expect them to come forward against gang members and violent murderers.
Do you think that it's important to have the level of expertise to know what witness intimidation looks like and how to spot that, and knowing that witness protection could be the key to getting a conviction in a case?
That experience is vital. It's needed at the highest level. It's needed throughout the office. It's needed in your victim services organization. This is a place where federal resources can be vital. It's not just because they have more money to move witnesses to a safe location. It's also that there's a level of trust that the federal system will actually protect them. We've had too many stories in this city of witnesses being intimidated, witnesses being targeted, witnesses being killed. I prosecuted a case of a witness who was prepared to testify in a Baltimore City case. He was killed in Baltimore County. And we worked with Baltimore County. I actually went out to Baltimore County and prosecuted that case myself, because a witness murder, killing a witness, sends the worst signal to the community that we can't protect our witnesses. Shame on us for letting that ever happen. But when it does, the heavy hammer of the consequences of committing a crime like that need to come down. And there, too, federal prosecutors and federal resources are vital.
Do you think that that is perhaps one of the biggest challenges facing the state's attorney's office right now?
Look, can I just say one thing about this? And then, of course it's a challenge. But it wasn't any different 10 years ago. People have been afraid to testify in the city for as long as the city has had gangs and violence. They always knew that there was a risk. But 10 years ago, we made more cases. We moved forward with more cases. We got more convictions. We were able to secure a measure of justice in these hard cases, despite the odds, despite the fact that people were reluctant, despite the fact that people were mistrustful of police. So when I hear Marilyn Mosby making these excuses about what a tough job it is, yeah, it's a tough job. Roya and I know that because we were in the office doing that hard work before we ran for state's attorney. And the reality is this, you got to choose in this moment what you want. Miss Mosby is an activist. She's an impassioned activist. There's a defense attorney in this race as well. But you have to decide whether you want an activist, a defense attorney, or a proven prosecutor. And if you want a proven prosecutor, I think the choices are clear.
Roya, did you want to weigh in on that?
You know, honestly, I think that the biggest problem facing the state's attorney's office is what we talked about earlier. It's staffing and training of prosecutors. You know, they had 2 homicide prosecutors quit this past week. They're losing people at a rapid rate, and you can't overcome that by just putting people with less and less experience in more serious jobs. And he is right. You know, prior to Miss Mosby taking over, Baltimore had around 200 homicides a year. And while that number isn't good, it is certainly better than the 335 and 340, 50, whatever number we're getting towards this year. And we can overcome this issue. And like I said, what witnesses want more than anything is honesty. They want to know what you're going to do and to have you actually have the skills and ability to follow through with that. And unfortunately, our prosecutors these days are so young that they don't have those skills.
Let me ask you, with the current level of staffing, whether it positions that are open or just the level of training that some of that the prosecutors have right now, with the current status of the city state's attorney's office, is Baltimore City at risk, and is it in danger because of the level of staff that they have to prosecute these cases?
Absolutely.
I
mean, just one word.
There's no question that this city is in a terrible position. We have 500 fewer police officers than we did when Marilyn Mosby took office. Despite all of the efforts to recruit, police don't want to work in this city where they're afraid that Marilyn Mosby is going to take to the steps of the War Memorial and make a big pronouncement at their expense for political gain. Nobody got convicted there. All she did was make a name for herself, and that is something that police officers in Baltimore City still fear. There's a lot that Marilyn Mosby has done that she should be proud of. But over the past 8 years, we have had 300+ murders every year, and she hasn't changed her approach to fighting crime. She hasn't changed her approach to saying the popular thing but not doing the hard thing. And as long as that is her approach, I think the people of Baltimore are starting to realize that things aren't going to get better. In fact, they're going to get worse.
Let's go back to some of our audience members who are here to ask the questions. The point of these town halls is to hear from you, the members in the community, and hear your questions to the candidates. If you could step up to the microphone, please say your name and direct your question to one of the candidates.
Yes, how are you, Mr. Through and Ms. Rona? Yeah, my name is Marcel Russell. I kind of want to talk about protecting both the citizens and the police officers. For a minute, I just want to share a minute, and then I'll have a direct question from it. Right now, that's 800,000 officers in the country. That's about one officer per 9,000 citizens. Police membership is down by almost 40%. Teachers are leaving by almost 40%. Membership are down. The number one complaint for the police officers and the teachers are fatherlessness. And so I really want to ask you guys about the plan for fatherlessness. Malachi 4:6 in the Bible, God says, I've designed the hearts of the children for their fathers, and I've designed the hearts of the fathers for their children. Any city who disconnects it, I would destroy every part of that city and bring it to utter destruction. Ephesians 4:6, God says the plan for children is through the father first. So I just want to kind of talk about some specific numbers about fatherlessness and laws in Baltimore. Midwest, they changed their laws. Anytime there's a child, there must be a co-parenting plan for that child before that child is left. Baltimore doesn't have that. 20 people out of Maryland are violated through crime right now. Baltimore City, it's almost 70 per 1,000. 90-something% of those children are from fatherless homes. 90s, and the guys in prison, I sat with the Black Guerrilla Gang, I sat with the Crips and the Bloods, and the guys in jail are saying 89% I was kept from my father. And so I just really want to ask you guys, right now there's 45,000 suicides of fathers, about 123 a day. Half of the children of those fathers are killing themselves. So many of the gangs, 91% of the homelessness right now, fatherlessness, right? I can go on and on. Every number, the Baltimore Sun has gone through great lengths of giving all the detail of the level of fatherlessness, in particular in Baltimore City. I want to know what kind of laws are you guys, I would like to see 3 or 4 things implemented. One, reconciliation centers with the children with the fathers. I would like to see people punished. Particularly, there's 1.5 million false allegations that are proven each year against the fathers. Proven. They didn't even do it. They weren't there, all the kind of, and it's no way for us to protect. We're putting all this weight on the police officers. We're putting all this weight on the teachers. It's because the children need their fathers.
What's your question specifically?
My specific question is, what laws or what influence are you guys going to have going into as a state's attorney to make sure that the family unit is restored, in particular that the children are allowed to have greater access to their fathers, because all of the states that are doing this, their crime rate is going down drastically. I said this in December, if we don't change the laws, crime will go up by 30%. February, y'all announced it went up 28%. I want to know, what are you going to do with the relationship with the children and the fathers so we can minimize the crime? We're not putting all this weight on these police officers. It's just not cool.
Thank you. Thank you. The question, working with the city council, perhaps to address and crafting legislation that could address some of Marcel's questions and concerns. Do you think that there's a relationship or a position for the state's attorney to work with the city council to make some of that happen?
Absolutely. Look, the reality is that the fabric of the family in so many parts of Baltimore has been damaged. And to get murders from 300 to 200, you don't need new laws. You just need effective blocking and tackling. To get from 200 murders to 100 murders, you're going to certainly need more effective job creation. To get from 100 murders to 0, you're going to have to repatch, restitch the fabric of the family. One thing that we can do that's very concrete is when people are returning from prison, we have a system right now where if you have unpaid child support, we take away your driver's license and we garnish 2/3 of your wages. It's a terrible system. Only 1% of the money that's out there is being collected. That's something that we can change to make sure that fathers have a reason when they come back from prison to reconnect and reunite and to try to be a more, to pursue a more constructive path.
Roya?
There was a great program, and I thought, forget whether it was out of Mississippi or Alabama, but it was about fathers, and it was about fathers in schools. And what they would do was a group of dads would just show up to the school and greet all the kids. And they found that a program just like that was good at reducing truancy and caused less fights in schools. We need our fathers to be an integral part of these children's lives. You know, I've talked a lot about truancy in my campaign because that, I think, is where all of our issues are coming from. If kids are not in school, they're not learning. If they're not learning, they have very little options left to them. And if we could address that issue, and I would love to see the fathers involved in things like that, and if we could address that, we will help to reduce crime in this city.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcel. I appreciate your question. All right, we have Ivan Bates. Mr. Bates, thank you for showing up and participating in this conversation. The last town hall that we had, you said you would only show up and answer questions and participate if Miss Marilyn Mosby was here. She wasn't, you weren't, you're here tonight. I guess my question is, what changed? What made you decide to show up tonight and not the last one?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me, but that's not what I said. What I said is that I was there to debate Miss Mosby. Your station said it was a debate, and then they changed it to a town hall. And also, your station also knew that I had a prior commitment tonight. And I wasn't asked. I was told that this town hall would be today. We sat down and later said that we had a prior commitment. At that moment in time, they said, oh, you could let us know. It's fine. I'm here. But to me, when you have a prior commitment, you honor your commitment. So you need to understand that to honor that commitment is important. So you are important, but I'd already had a previous commitment. Having that previous commitment, you do the job that you decided to do first.
I understand that. We invited you to this town hall 2.5 weeks ago. We first heard from your campaign yesterday.
No, actually you didn't, but I understand. I'm not here to argue with you, Ms. Ross, but you didn't. Thank you.
That's not what our emails show, but we'll move on. Let's go on and talk about crime. We talked a lot about the prosecution policies earlier in this event tonight. My question, do you think that the prosecution policies need to shift, if elected, from the current plans that are happening in Baltimore City right now?
Yes, I do believe they need to shift because right now you have to hold people accountable. That's not what's happening. If you do not hold people accountable, people are going to do what they want to do. But that doesn't mean we go back to just mass incarceration that we saw under people such as Norris. We have to make sure that we give people an alternative. For instance, if you look at drugs, we can't necessarily go back to war on drugs. I believe that we need to have treatment. The treatment, we can sit down and direct these individuals to the treatment. We have an opioid epidemic. People are dying. If you don't have that treatment that is there and the money is there in the system, then people will have that treatment to get better, to avoid that death. Let's look at prostitution. Prostitution, sex working, and sex trafficking, they all look exactly the same. And so one of the things that's very important is the police must engage individuals. Once the police engage an individual, there's no way to tell the difference between prostitution and sex trafficking unless the police engage. Because the police are no longer engaging, the police are right now, Baltimore has become the hub of sex trafficking. It's not about locking up individuals, it's about making sure the police engage, giving the police all the tools in a toolbox. I don't believe in one size fits all. Look at loitering, trespass, gambling. The police can go ahead and first give a warning, second, give a citation. That citation will eventually take you to what I call community court, and you can do community service, making sure you're part of your community doing the right thing. So it's not about trying to lock up individuals, but it's about the police allowing them to do their job and holding people accountable.
Let me just make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying correctly. Would you reverse some of the policy or the policies to not prosecute low-level crimes? Do you agree with that?
No, I would reverse all the policies. However, for instance, if there's a person who wants to loiter, the first time you will give them a warning. I think the consent decree talks about that. The second time you may give them a citation, and they do community service. Then the third time, they've kind of made the choice that they wish to be prosecuted because they don't want to listen and follow the law. You have to hold people accountable. My goal is not to lock people up. My goal is accountability.
So it's about the blanket policy that's in place right now. That's okay.
No, we're not doing that.
Okay, I understand. Did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we've been sort of very clear that the blanket policy sends a terrible message to the community. It sends a confusing message to the cops, and it does a disservice because it emboldens criminals. That is a real consequence of this.
Now, let me ask you, this is a viewer question that we got from some of the constituents who sent in their questions. This is from Alice People, and it says, why is it so hard to get guns out of the hands of criminals? She says that she just lost her nephew to gun violence. What are we doing, and why are so many people dying from the gun violence? Obviously, this is a question that we get a lot. We're seeing the gun violence continue to grow out of control in Baltimore City. Roy, I want to start with you. Why do you think it's so hard to get the guns out of the hands of criminals?
Right now, it's because we're not holding them accountable. You know, I had a case yesterday where the guy had an extensive record and, you know, it was perfectly valid stop. We had done the motions and everything, and yet he got probation again. And when you're constantly sending that message that for gun crimes, no matter what they are, no matter if they're robberies or carjackings or murders, nothing's going to happen, of course people are going to carry guns. So I think there is a level of accountability that's missing, and also it is the level of certainty of conviction. Mm-hmm. We have to make sure that those cases are rock solid so that we can actually hold people who need to be held accountable and put them in jail.
Through?
I think this is a subject on which I imagine all of us agree. Because if you are charged with a gun crime, there have to be consequences for that. And there's 3 places right now where that's breaking down. The current state's attorney is dropping too many cases. 30 to 40% of gun cases involving guns, whether it's felon in possession or carjacking using a gun, are being dropped. There's a huge number of cases, this is the second problem, where they're being pled out to probation. They're being let back out on the street. They're counting as a conviction for the purposes of Miss Mosby's conviction rate, but they're not actually delivering any justice. They're not actually delivering any safety because the people that had these guns, whether they used them in a carjacking or were caught with it in their car, are right back on the streets. And the third failure is when the cases are going to trial, a lot of those cases are resulting in losses. You can't drop so many cases, plead out cases to bargain basement results, and lose cases at trial and expect criminals to get the message that carrying a gun is going to carry jail time.
Ivan? Ivan, why do you think it's so difficult to get the guns off the street?
Well, you know, I wrote a prosecution plan that you can go and check on my website, batesforbaltimore.com. And I did a lot of research, and part of the research I looked at the Johns Hopkins Gun Institute. Mm-hmm. And the policy talks about certainty of consequences. You know, something I've talked about a long time, about certainty of consequences. So what does that mean? With me, it means that you're going to jail if you have an illegal handgun. When you have that understanding, that belief, you have to understand that. And so one of the things that 2 types of individuals are carrying guns. One is a repeat violent offender. Those individuals have to go to prison. You have to win those cases, and they have to go to prison. And number 2 is the youthful young offender. They're carrying guns because they're scared. They're carrying guns because it's part of the culture. So what do you do for them? First-time gun offenders, you have to go to jail. But it's a difference between prison and jail. Jail's local. And so what I also know as a criminal defense attorney, a lot of the young people, they can't really read or write. If you can't read or write, you can't have a job. If you can't have a job, you're going to be in a different situation. So for me, it's simple. What the state's attorney can do as part of the process is say, hey, we are going to make sure part of your probation encompasses this. 1, you will get the literacy programs that you need to make sure that you can learn to read and write. Number two, we're also going to make sure you get to job training programs. That's very important. But also, one of the things that the city has done, they put a lot of money in therapy training and therapy. We need to give those and direct those individuals those therapy classes to help them make better decisions. If they can do it 3 years in a row, stay out of trouble for 3 years, then we can go ahead and do something revolutionary different. We can make sure that individual receives a probation before judgment and have an expungement. Because now you have an individual that now has hope. A lot of these individuals are carrying guns because they don't have hope. We want to make sure that we allowed you as a 27, 28-year-old individual who now has one conviction to make sure that now you have a job, you have education, and those are things that are important.
Now, you mentioned the repeat violent offenders, and that's obviously been a problem. We've seen suspects after suspects getting arrested with a rap sheet a mile long. This brings up another question from a viewer, John Fowler. How do you specifically address the problem of repeat violent offenders? We've seen this come up in legislation in Annapolis. It doesn't get traction from the Democrats who control the legislature in Annapolis. Do you think that that is something that should be addressed at the state level to help in Baltimore City specifically? Roya, we'll go down the line.
Yes, I do think that we need to address the problem of violent repeat offenders. You know, I filed a lawsuit a month or so ago, and we're still waiting for the numbers from Ms. Mosby. You know, it's really important to understand the problem so that we can fix the problem. And we wanted to know what the actual conviction rate is. And to really look into what we can do about this, you know, violent repeat offenders, unless they're given extensive reentry services and all of those sorts of things, they will not change. We have to address it on the back end, but at the beginning, honestly, if they're going to continue to commit crimes, they have to go to jail. And they probably have to go to jail for a long period of time if they haven't learned their lesson.
Should there be specific or tougher mandatory minimums for repeat violent offenders, especially people who use guns to commit their crimes?
There currently are tough measures.
Should there be tougher?
You know, I think if we were enforcing the laws in the first place, we might have seen a change already. You know, the laws are pretty tough at this point. I think it's, 10 years mandatory for after your first offense and then 25 after that. And if we were even close to those kind of numbers as far as incarcerating violent repeat offenders now, I would say, okay, let's look at making them tougher if it's not getting the outcome that we want. But quite frankly, if you're a violent repeat offender and you commit a robbery and say you get probation for your first robbery, maybe you'll get 2 or 3 years for your second robbery. That's nowhere close to the 10 that already is on the books. So I don't necessarily know that we need tougher laws. I do think that we need to enforce the laws that we have now.
Theroux?
Yeah, I think that Roya is exactly right, that there are very stiff laws on the books right now that are not being used to go after gun violence, to go after guns in the first place. I think I'm the only candidate, and Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, that has come out to support the governor's legislation in this respect. And the reality is that the governor has tried to do a number of things to help Baltimore City, and too often our local politicians have responded with insults, with ignoring him, when in fact a Democratic governor would have done exactly the same thing. They would have lined up for the photo op, sending more money to recruit and train better police. Things like that the governor has been doing from day one are things that we ought to be supporting, and we got to put politics aside because these bullets don't have a party affiliation. The people that are being killed don't care what party you are. We're all proud Democrats, but the reality is that crime is destroying in the city, and we got to do something about it.
Ivan?
Yeah. Well, one of the problems that we have is if you can't win any cases, violent repeat offenders are winning the day. That's what's happening. So let's look at the state's attorney's office. State's attorney's office, about 150 to 163 positions are there with prosecutors. In the past 7 years, about 233 prosecutors have left that office. You have zero experience. You don't have the talent necessarily. You have young prosecutors who are trying. They're overwhelmed. So one of the things that's very important under me, I'm going to make sure that we have the individuals back in the office doing what we need to do. Also, one of the things we have to do day one is all hands on deck. If you're a prosecutor and getting paid as a prosecutor, you will go to court. You will go to trial. Right now, in the state's attorney's office, 12 to 15 of the top 50 prosecutors are not going to trial. They're not going to court. I will go to court. I will go to trial. That's important. You have to lead by example.
What are they doing? If they're not going to court, what are they doing?
They're pushing the paper. They're not fighting. They're sitting there making excuses as to what's happening. Right now, when you have an emergency, it's all hands on deck, and that's what's important. With me, it will be all hands on deck, and every single person paid as a prosecutor must and should go into the courtroom and try cases. Because trying cases and winning cases are how violent repeat offenders get the message that it will not be allowed or tolerated.
Would you support tougher mandatory minimum sentences?
No, I do not support that because the laws are already on the books. When you're winning cases and you're doing the job, you don't need to worry about tougher penalties. They don't count if you're not winning, and we're going to win.
Perfect. Okay, let's go to another audience question. We have a number of people lining up. Again, if you could please just step up to the mic, closely to the mic, say your name, and briefly get to your question and direct it to one of the candidates up on stage.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Miss Tao. First, before I start, I just want to give a moment of silence to Miss Rochester. I'm sorry about your son. Yes. Thank you. Next, I would like to say something positive. I found that I was a victim of a crime. I actually tried to report it, and I felt discouraged. My case ended up getting no process when I came forward and showed what the person did to me, and it was a financial crime. Like, I hear us talking about gun violence and all the other issues, but there are also other things that are occurring, especially like theft of equity. I don't feel safe in Baltimore with my equity. My property's under attack because I have a property that's I guess a high value property. I've been in the area for over 20 years. I educated a lot of Baltimore City. I started out as a daycare provider coming straight out of Morgan State University. And I dedicated myself to education because I saw that there was a lack of education, that all of these things are interconnected. One of the things I wanted to cover was that I felt that when I tried to approach government, no one was listening. It was very hard to get in to talk to people. I want to give, much accolades. I like to see a woman on panel. Yes, ma'am. I like to see Mr. Theroux. I've been following your career. I see all the accolades that you've done and how, you got the city to address water bill issues, because I'm a victim of that. Sir, I came to your office and you even talked to me. So, I felt very, humbled that, I just want to see a change. I am tired of this. I feel like I'm throwing constant resources. We have white-collar crime, theft of equity. I worked 20 years to be in a property that I could lose overnight off of a false allegation, and you can't go to anyone here. When I took it to the state's attorney, they told me they were gonna, they took the case, and then at the last minute, just no process, and then said, oh, we gotta research. What are we scared of? And then it makes you not want to tell on anybody. I feel intimidated. I got somebody that's harassing me through legal judicial process that goes over my head because my degree is not in law. My degree is in education. And I shouldn't have to do that. I am a citizen, I'm a human being, and I want to be treated right. What could I guess each candidate, I'm asking each one of you, how do you plan on dealing with things like theft of equity and the city doing stuff, abusing their privileges, erroneous bills? You got $100,000 taxes, and look where we live at. We got 400 murders, and you say I owe $100,000 in 1 year on a property? What tax bill is that going to?
Thank you. Thank you. Ivan, why don't you take the first question, and I guess simply it's, we talk a lot about the violent crime, the homicides, the shootings, but she's right, there are other crimes happening in Baltimore as well. How do you address all of it at once?
What's your last name, ma'am?
T-A-O.
Ms. Tao, first of all, I want to thank you for that. And I also want to thank you for giving that moment of silence to our Chester family. My condolences for the loss of the loved one. I think one of the things that people don't necessarily understand is how dysfunctional the state's attorney's office is. The state's attorney's office has a department called economic crimes. At one time, they had 5 or 6 prosecutors when I worked there. Now there are 2. Now I think it's down to 1. The division chief left and had a pile of cases on his desk because he didn't want to work in the state's attorney's office any longer either. Now there's a young prosecutor who's there who doesn't necessarily know what they're doing. And unfortunately, when you have inexperienced prosecutors, this is what we have, the dysfunction. I think it's important, one, to make sure you staff the office properly, make sure you have people who know what they're doing, they're going to the proper trainings, and they treat you the way that you need to be treated. You said you came to my office and you talked to me. That's how every single prosecutor needs to make sure they make any and every single victim feel. Your real estate issue, my law partner's here, Tony Garcia. Talk to him and we'll still be able to help you, okay? Thank you.
The room?
Ms. Tao, you're pointing to two different things, and I think they're important. There are some things that are bona fide crimes. One of the reasons why we've pledged to have a public corruption unit is to go find out where all this money is going. Every one of these agencies is given tens of millions of dollars. The school system, DPW, the Department of Transportation, nobody knows where that money is going. Is it bribery? Is it procurement fraud? Those are things that can be prosecuted by the state's attorney's office. But I appreciate you recognizing that over the last couple of years, we haven't just focused on that. We've recognized that there are some things that are outside of the province of criminal prosecution, but are still big problems. These water bills, these women that have lost homes in tax sales, the young men that can't find jobs, there are things that can be done through advocacy, through fighting for them. That's not per se the role of the state's attorney, but knowing the distinction between the things that we can do and the things that others have to do to make sure that we fight for those things as well is part of our job as a leader in this city.
Roya?
Ma'am, you know, our campaign helped to bring forward the case of the Luther Trent, and the young lady in that case was this wonderful woman, Alexis, and she had fought so hard to get her voice heard, and the state's attorney's office was so dismissive of her, and they didn't explain things to her. They gave her excuses, and they just shoved her along and just treated her without any respect whatsoever. That cannot happen. I have pledged since before that to be the voice of the victim and to really advocate for victims of crime in this city. As for the public corruption, we do have to have a public corruption unit. But I also have to ask, and this isn't necessarily directed to you, but why is it that all of the my opponents in this case have sought the endorsement of disgraced public officials? Things like that, to me, make no sense. We have to have one office that is going to completely eschew anything to do with corruption. And, you know, Mr. Vignarajah was talking about where the money goes. I also have to ask that about the state's attorney's office. You know, under Mr. Bernstein, he had a budget of around $35 million, and now it's up to $48 million under Ms. Mosby. He had 217 prosecutors, and now she's down to 100 and something. And where is all the money going? If you're not paying for prosecutors, I don't know what's happening to it. You know, the money issue confuses me in this city, and that's why we need a public corruption unit, and we need to get to the bottom of this. The Inspector General is doing a wonderful job of bringing things out, but she needs the support of a law enforcement agency like the state's attorney's office that can actually file charges.
Thank you. Did you have one more?
Yeah.
Quickly?
Is there a plan that we're, to be honest with you, I feel like all of y'all are superstars as far as you all got great panels and great platforms. How can we work together? Because I feel like I pick a vote and this person does 4 years and we back to square one again. I've been in this city since our college, and it's just going in the same direction. It's like, okay, let's put another face, but it's like a puppeteer, like a hidden puppeteer keeps on bringing the same show back, just different characters. So, you know, I'm saying to you, what could we do from all candidates to work together? That, okay, if you're first in command, you're second in command, she's third in command, or vice versa. How could we come with a plan? Because I can't do this anymore. It's dysfunctional, and it's heartbreaking.
Thank you. Roya?
I have already said that if Mr. Bates and Mr. Vignarajah want to come work for me, they're more than welcome. I'm down with that. I can be the face of this office and make the policies that make things work, but I know that they're good workers, and they'll help me get the job done.
The room.
I'd be honored to serve, and I'd be honored to have my colleagues in the office. This is why we have elections, because these choices are important, and I'm so grateful that people are paying as much attention to this race as they are. We do need change, and we do need something different. I don't have anything personal against Ms. Mosby, but she's been there for 8 years. Her time is up. We need some change.
Ivan?
Thank you. I think you need to look at people's track records. I remember when I was a former prosecutor, I left that office. Eventually, I started my own law firm. It was just me. Now my firm is one of the top criminal defense firms in the state. I do cases all around the country. I'm telling you and the other citizens, I'm walking away from my law practice because I have a 5-year-old daughter. I want to make sure we have a safer city for her. That's one of the main reasons I'm running. I can also look you in the eyes and tell you this is an 8 to 10-year job to fix this mess. And I'm here to tell you I'm not running for any other position. This is not a stepping stone. I will be there. So when you look up, we don't need to worry about who's next. Only thing you'll need to know is that the system's working and that I'm in control, and we'll make sure that we continue to make Baltimore a safer city for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, all candidates. I appreciate you answering my questions.
Thank you for your question. Thank you. I want to ask about track records and talking about records and prosecution history. Roya, we'll start with you because you were most recently in the City State's Attorney's Office. We're talking about a lot of different crimes, but obviously homicides and non-fatal shootings, two of the most violent crimes happening in Baltimore City right now. Homicide specifically, can you talk about your record and your prosecution record when it comes to homicide cases?
I was in homicide for 4 years. And, you know, when I was in homicide, we did things a little bit differently, and we would actually go down in the middle of the night and work with our detectives and help build the cases. And we would be there and we'd meet with the victim's family first thing, and we'd interview the witnesses. And that is why the cases that we had were so rock solid. That is one of the reasons why I never lost a homicide in the entire 4 years that I was there. None of the other candidates can even come close to my record. I think they have a couple between them, but I tried over 10 murders, and I never lost.
Theroux?
Look, I'm very proud of my record. I served as a federal prosecutor. I was then chief of major investigations in Baltimore City and then as deputy attorney general for the state of Maryland. In both as a line prosecutor, as a federal prosecutor, as an assistant U.S. attorney, and as a supervisor, I tried a number of cases. Like Roya, I took a number of cases to trial, and all of them resulted in a conviction. Some of those cases were carjacking, some of those cases were murder, some of those cases involved gangs, some of those cases involved guns. I do think experience matters. I do think it matters that you've had a chance to try these cases at a lot of different levels and from a lot of different vantage points. I'm very, very proud of my record as a federal, city, and state prosecutor, and I love trying cases. One of the best jobs in America is to be in a courtroom trying to seek justice for a family, and I'd be honored to have a chance to do it again.
Mr. Bates?
It's not just about trying cases, it's about supervision as well. Currently, right now, I'm trying a triple homicide in Los Angeles. I also tried a number of cases in Baltimore City, homicides as well. I didn't have my cases overturned like some of the people on this panel did. My cases were convictions, and they still are convictions. I've been on the defense side, I've been on the prosecution side. I've done cases in federal court and tried cases in state court. Not everybody on the panel can say they've ever tried a federal case. 2 of us can. But I think it's important with that experience. But what really separates me is having built a law firm from scratch, having managed individuals, knowing what that is like. And to really change the culture of the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office, you need to have tried cases on the state level, the federal level, built something from scratch to manage the individuals to make sure that we can work together as a team.
I want to dive into something that we've touched on a little bit when it comes to carjackings, because so far we've seen a 70% increase in carjackings in Baltimore City this year compared to last year. We'll go down the panel, but Theroux, I want to ask you specifically, because you've talked about your carjacking plan, about how do you plan to reverse this trend in Baltimore City, and do you think that, you know, is there really anything in the state's attorney's arsenal that can be done to stem this rise in carjacking?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that happens in a political campaign is it's easy to sort of focus on the high-level stuff. I think we all have. We thought it was important to also provide detailed plans on some of the more specific issues, open-air drug markets, human trafficking, armed carjackings. And we put out, early on in the campaign, a 5-part plan to address armed carjackings, to make sure that there were more referrals to the U.S. Attorney's Office, to put in place a Jack alert, like an Amber alert, to be able to make sure that we can pursue those cases when they get happen, to encourage with incentives and subsidies the adoption of GPS tracking services. State Farm does this right now, where if you put a GPS tracking system in your car, you get a lower insurance rate. These are all kinds of things that we can advocate for and push for and do ourselves when you know that you've got an epidemic. 70% higher than last year. Last year we had the highest per capita carjacking rate in the country. It has never been worse, and we're not taking it seriously enough.
We all just got an Amber Alert on our phones moments ago, so talking about Amber Alerts. But when it comes to this specific Jack Alert program, do you have the authority to do that? And is that really the place of the police to be sending out those alerts and looking for those suspects?
Yeah, look, that is not something that the state's attorney's office would do alone. It was something that we would do in concert and in partnership with other agencies. In this respect, this is something that Marilyn Mosby has done quite well. She's forged partnerships with other agencies to do certain programs. My concern is that they've never really scaled. failed. You know, you had the law enforcement assisted diversion program to get folks the help that they needed. In 2017, you can literally Google this, they announced the plan. They had 60 spots, and there's not another article about it. So the partnerships can be done. You can't do these things alone. You got to work with the police. You got to work with the governor. You got to work with the U.S. Attorney's Office. You got to work with state and federal agencies. Those partnerships are critical, but the ideas, the leadership can come from the state's attorney's office.
Ivan, how would you address the rise in carjackings? And do you think that there's a specific approach that the state's attorney's office could do when it comes to prosecuting those suspects for carjacking?
Well, this is where I think we have to have realistic expectations. We have an office that can't hardly handle the cases that it's focused on now. We don't have that leadership experience, and you don't have the lawyers there who know how to even do those types of cases. So that's why in my prosecution plan I talk about focusing on the foundational piece, which is guns. If we can really focus on guns, guns are used in the carjackings, guns are used in the murders, guns are used in attempt murders, guns are used all the time, and that's the problem. If we focus and take the experience, the few experienced prosecutors are there, we put them in teams so that they are already together and working together, understanding how to handle each and every single handgun in each and every single case, we can do more with less. Until we are able to recruit the more experienced prosecutors back. Now, when I see them, they say, hey, I want to come back and work with you and only you. And so we can do this. We can change the culture, but it's not going to take, it's not something we can do overnight. It's one of those things that we must work together in a way, but we have to understand we have a finite amount of resources, meaning the skill set of prosecutors to handle those types of intricate cases. We're still going to focus on carjackings, but we're going to do it through our gun unit.
And if I can just add one thing, I mean, this is a place where it sounds like Mr. Bates and I disagree. Of course we're going to focus on guns, but carjackings are also predicate crimes for other crime sprees. If you're going to spend your day doing robberies, you start your day doing a carjacking. That's one of the reasons why carjackings are up. It's partly because security systems have become more sophisticated, so you can't just steal a car. You need a live victim to take the car. But it's also because if you're going to do other crimes, you need to carjack to begin your crime spree. So going after carjackings allows you to stop some of those serial crimes that also victimize individuals, put people at risk, putting aside the fact that victims of carjackings often become, as we've seen in the city too often, victims of homicide.
Roya, how would you address carjacking as we see the continued rise in the number of the instances across the city?
Well, I think what we have to understand is that carjackings are done by a small group of people, and they're generally done by juveniles. So people under 25 or even into their teens are the people who are committing these carjackings. We have to do more to address the juvenile crime issue in this city. That's why I have an early intervention program that is designed to address issues of truancy. Because if the kids are in school, they're not out running the streets and they're not out stealing people's cars. And we have to recognize that these kids are committing multiple carjackings in one day. It is the new form of joyriding. They carjack a car, they take it around for a few hours, and then they steal somebody else's car, use that car to do the other carjacking. And we have to address that particular issue. We have to get these kids back in school. We have to reform our juvenile justice system because our juvenile justice system is not working in this city. You know, parenting is a public safety issue. We have to encourage parents to be parents and make sure that their kids are in school and make sure that they're not running the streets and carjacking people and causing violent crime.
Speaking of youth and violence, we just had a teen who was arrested for the carjacking of the Baltimore police officer in South Baltimore just last week. We had a 16-year-old who was charged in connection of the murder with the man in Fells Point just last week as well. You talk about teens and crime. We're seeing that on the rise. Teens and younger people are getting involved in some of this violent crime in Baltimore City. Outside of truancy, we just talked about that, Roya, but through, how do you address this growing problem if this is going to be where some of the violence is stemming from citywide?
Yeah, this problem of juvenile justice has gotten completely out of hand. And what Roya said is right. Frederick Douglass said before the American Civil War that it is easier to raise strong children than to repair broken men. I wish we could do more there. There's no question that we have to. But we also have to get realistic about the fact that there are some kids, young kids, that need a second chance. They need support and services. But there are repeat violent offenders that need to learn that there are consequences for their conduct. If there's a 16-year-old committing a carjacking, carrying a gun, doing an armed robbery, doing a shooting, there have to be consequences for that. It can't just be a slap on the wrist because you're a juvenile. And I do think that there are differences of opinion with respect to how Ms. Mosby has approached this. She's advocated for mandatory charging of juveniles as adults. That means everybody gets charged as an adult, and in the end, all of them get sent back down to juvenile. That's not a particularly effective system. I would rather see us be much more selective in focusing on the folks that actually need to go to the adult system. I don't know if the light's going out means you can't see me, but I think this is a big problem. It might be the hardest problem to distinguish between those young people that need support and services and those violent repeat offenders that need to learn that there are consequences for their crimes.
I think we're working on the light. Hopefully we'll get that back on here. But Mr. Bates, when it comes to juveniles and crime, how would you address this issue if elected? And is there a role in the state's attorney's office to do that?
Yes, if you go to my prosecution plan on my website, batesforbaltimore.com, you'll see on my 5th pillar I talk about youthful offenders. Right now, the state's attorney's office uses the juvenile system as a training ground. You can't do that, because one of the things that you find out is that a lot of these families they have some dysfunctional issues. And so there are a lot of people, good people in this city that work really hard and don't necessarily have the opportunity with their children. And when their children sometimes are in groups, they're in the neighborhood, they're being influenced by groups of individuals that their parents may not even know about, and if they do have a parent in the household. So we have to take all that in consideration. One of the things that you need to do is make sure that we have individuals, when I'm state's attorney, who are dedicated to children, to the youthful offenders, to make sure that these individuals, it's a little bright now, to make sure these individuals know who they are. They have to be in the programs. They understand the programs. State's attorney's office doesn't always teach the prosecutors all the programs that are there. One of the things I talk about in my plan is a program that's very similar to the program in Milwaukee that I talk about, homicide review, but I want to bring it to the juvenile section, where we bring the social workers, the school system, the state's attorney's office, the public defenders, the Baltimore City Police Department, the school police. We want to bring them down to look at not just the juvenile, but let's look at all the issues affecting that family. Let's look at the issues. For instance, say there are 3 children. One's 15, one's 12, and one's 8. The 15-year-old now is with guns and drugs. The 12-year-old, let's say, is fighting in school, and the 8-year-old's a little girl who's in a child in need of assistance. My prosecutor will sit down and understand what's going on and staff that case with everybody, understanding that the father is no longer there. For instance, they may be a murder victim, but the mother may work 2 or 3 jobs. This child who's 15 may have a low IEP. Understanding what this child and this entire family needs will allow us to make sure that we take these young children so they're not broken later on in the future. We have to step in and we have to make sure we give them the service they need. However, if they are violent, we also have to hold them accountable. We can be compassionate, but we also must hold them accountable to protect the citizens of Baltimore City.
Looks like we have our lights fixed. We're shining the light back on the stage. And that brings us to a question about transparency, because it's a little dark in the city state's attorney's office when it comes to getting some information and getting data from the current city state's attorney. Roy, I want to ask you a question when it comes to being transparent with the public and producing the information and records and prosecution data and results. Would you publish that information so the public can understand what's really happening inside your office if elected?
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, I have filed a lawsuit against the state's attorney's office to try to get that data, because voters deserve to know what's actually happening. They deserve to know how many cases are being dropped. Are they against violent repeat offenders? Are they being pled down to probation? What's happening on probation? They deserve to have all of that information so that they can make an informed decision in November. And I would be transparent, and I would be transparent not only about the convictions, but about other things like the do not call list, if there was such a list, which I imagine there will be, and making sure that the public has information about police misconduct and things of that nature.
And speaking, when it comes to that information, though, as well, you would publish the results of cases that were won and lost.
Absolutely. This current administration, she is very fond of releasing press releases about every conviction, even sometimes skewing the data a little bit. But I think that you should say when a case was lost and why a case was lost. If a case is lost because the police mishandled the evidence, the public deserves to know that, and we need to take steps to fix that. If a case was lost because victims recanted, the public deserves to know that. Baltimore understands hard things. Our people have lived with hard truths for a long time. As long as you're open and honest and tell them what is actually happening and not try to spin it and always make it seem like you're the greatest thing in the world, even though you're failing, they will understand and they will be behind you.
I think Ms. Hannah actually put it well, and I think it's too bad that it requires a lawsuit to get what is public information. We have pledged not only to make active cases easily, readily accessible to the public, you would also have a public database of the prior outcomes. Which cases got dropped? What number of cases got dropped? What happened to the cases when they got pled out? Did the person get time served or a 5-year sentence? And of the cases that went to trial, which ones resulted in the conviction and which one didn't? In addition to that, we've pledged to have a public CompStat, one in each of the 9 police districts and 3 citywide, where we'd come and talk to the public, just as we did here. We'd be forthright about the things that are going well, and we'd be honest about the things that are not going well, and we'd explain to the best of our ability what we're doing to fix that. That's what the public needs. That's what the public deserves.
Ivan?
Yes. In my prosecution plan, I talked about the data portal that I have. My data portal will be very unique. It's not like the one we see now, but my data portal will be very user-friendly. For instance, if you've been carjacked right there on McCullough Mosier, and it happened on August 15th, 2021, you'll be able to look, pull up that date, and it'll be right there. You'll understand what happened. Who had the case? Where's the case number? What is the case number? Where is that case in the process? Is it in city, district court, circuit court? Or is there going to be who are the prosecutors? What's the defense attorney? Who's the judge that it could potentially go to court with? We'll make sure that you have that information so it's easy to find, easy to follow. We'll also make sure that we list, if we need to, the officers who are involved. And that's very important because the citizens need to understand the totality of the entire case, because we need them to be a part of the process as well. Because when the citizens feel that they're a part of the process, when the citizens feel safe, then they want to be engaged in this activity. And being engaged in the activity will allow us to have better cases, to have the convictions, to hold people accountable.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's go back to perhaps our last audience question here. If you could just walk right up to the microphone, say your name, and address your brief question to one of the candidates up on stage.
Yes, my name is Kia Shaw. I'm the sister of Benjamin Tyson. He was killed February the 25th, 2021 at 55 Marketplace. I'm here because I want to know, as a citizen, what can we do as citizens to work with the police to be able to come up with a solution that the citizens and the officers can work together instead of working apart. We need something that we can sit at a panel and say, listen, this is what's going on in our community. What can we do to make things better? As well as the officers saying, well, listen, we having problems with this, this, and the third. What can we do as officers? There's no transparency. There's no police interaction with people. It's not like it used to be. Mr. Bates, the meeting started at 6:30, my brother. You bust up at 7:30. You understand where I'm coming from? You want us to vote for you, right? You want us to show transparency and be on time for things. We want the same thing for you. We hear a lot of blaming on Marilyn Mosby, but we don't see a lot of actions from others to change to help her either. So my thing is, what are y'all planning to do to help her instead of throwing her under the bus? Because she have done well things for this city of Baltimore.
Thank you. Mr. Bates?
Yeah. Well, first of all, take your beginning of your question out of prior commitment that I made about 6 to 7 weeks ago. Based on that prior commitment, my mama told me you honor your commitments. So I apologize for being late, but I had to honor my commitment. But I'm here and I'm gonna make sure I answer your question. So when it looks in reference to police, the communication, the whole system's not working. Remember, the state's attorney's office, for whatever reason, are fighting with the police. And we see the police fighting with parts of the community. We can't have that. And that's where you have to have leadership. The same way I can look at you and apologize for when I'm wrong, we got to look at the police and have them apologize when they're wrong. But we as a people also have to apologize when we're wrong with the police. We have to support the police. There are some good police officers, but there are some bad police officers. But there are a lot of good police officers who are given the time each and every single day to make sure they keep us protected. Now, we also have to make sure we participate in our community association meetings and things like that. I have a number of plans in my prosecution plan and talk about programs, bringing people together to sit and talk about what's really happening. Yes. But what it really is going to take is leadership. The leadership to look an individual in the eye and apologize when you're wrong, to make sure we can move on and we can come together in a way that helps all of us. But in reference to Ms. Mosby, at this moment in time, all of us are running for that position. We're running for that position because I know I can do a better job. You deserve a better job. The city deserves a better job. My goal and my job will be to keep you and all the other citizens safe. And that will be my job, to work with the police and everybody else to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The room?
You know what's hard for me is we've tried to help Ms. Mosby. I've offered suggestions. We've tried to work with folks. It's been a tough 8 years. And she's not responsible for all of it, but she was in a position to do more than she's done. She's had her chance. She hasn't led. I will. But I want to give you something very specific that we can do to rebuild the relationship between the prosecutor's office, the police department, and the community. I have pledged to create a model of community prosecution where prosecutors are assigned to districts, to neighborhoods, so that you are getting a chance to get to know the prosecutors who are handling the cases in your neighborhood. Those prosecutors are going to be paired with police officers that are working in those districts. Those are the kinds of relationships that used to exist. It wasn't just officer friendly, it was also that you knew the people that represented you. You knew the people that were fighting for you. That specific model is something that we can build here in Baltimore to try to restitch the fabric of that trust. Right now that trust is broken. It needs to be rebuilt, and this is one concrete thing we can do to try to forge that relationship again.
Roya?
So I know you want an answer right now and something that you can do tomorrow. And I would encourage you to look at the CRC meetings. They are a group of community members who actually meet on a monthly basis with the police department in each district. And they go over things like this. The police ask them, have you heard any information? And there's a good avenue of communication. So I would really encourage you to get connected with those groups and to meet with them. And, you know, as far as commenting on Ms. Mosby, and we all have tried to help the office along and train young prosecutors. You know, even as a defense attorney, I'm always giving them advice on ways that they can be a little better. One thing I will say about Ms. Mosby, she has done amazing work as far as expanding the victim services. Compared to what it was 8 years ago, I will say that. She has really sought to create a lot of people who can go out and meet with victims. And I do believe in giving credit where credit's due. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm always criticizing her. There are some good things that have happened.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I just had one more question.
We don't have time. I'm sorry.
It's real quick.
Okay.
It's a lot. We hear a lot about us, but what about police being held accountable? We hear a lot of accountability. That's what's going to be done to, you know, regular civilians and citizens that commit crimes and do things. What is about to be done with police officers that do these things, corrupt officers, police officers, brutality, killings? What are they going to do about that? We hear a lot about what they're going to do for the citizens, what they're going to do about the police.
My guess is we all agree on this. If they commit a crime, they ought to be prosecuted. If they commit misconduct, they ought to be sanctioned. But if they didn't do anything wrong, they shouldn't be paraded out into the public just to make a political point.
Absolutely.
30 seconds, Ivan.
I think for me, there's a book called I Got a Monster. It talks about what I've done to hold the Gun Trace Task Force accountable. If you look at the movie, We Run This City, there's an actor who will be playing me for the role that I played to hold Wayne Jenkins accountable. The proof is right there. I'll hold them accountable, the corrupt ones.
Can I get in contact with your office?
Definitely can.
We can make that happen. Roya, 30 seconds on police accountability, and then our time is up tonight.
As I mentioned, I'm the only person up on this stage who has personally tried and convicted a police officer for shooting an unarmed person. So I believe in holding police accountable, and I will certainly do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all of our audience members who came and participated tonight. Thank you to our candidates who answered questions. Thank you for joining us. We'll continue to hold these Fox 45 News town halls across the city. Have a great night.